for this program, not just because of our wonderful poets, but because this is our first reading being done in the library since 2020. So we are, this is wonderful. There's a couple things to celebrate tonight, so this is exciting. For those of you who don't know me, if you haven't seen me around the building, my name is Rebecca Starr, or Becca's fine. I am the literature and language librarian here at Portland Public in the downtown library. So I manage all of the fiction, all of the poetry, and the collections as well as the programs. If it's been a while since you've been in the building, that's okay. Just want to let you know the restrooms are just across the hall over here, and there's a water fountain too, so feel free. Obviously, it's not an environment where you have to ask for permission. One change in our practice that we have is the library has a land acknowledgement, so I'm going to read that to start. Portland Public Library would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the occupied and unceded territory of the Wabanaki, the people of the place where the sun first looks our way, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We extend our respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous people and their ancestors whose rich histories and vibrant communities include the Abenaki, Mullaseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations, and all the native communities who have lived in Chewabunkeag for over 3,000 generations in what is now called New England and the Canadian Maritimes. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So tonight, we are here to celebrate the Café Review and all of the hard work that goes into this volunteer-powered powerhouse. The Café Review is not only a wonderful local publication for both visual art and poetry, but at 34 years old, it's the longest running here in Portland. Their spring issue for 2023 was just released. We do have some on the back table on your way out. There is a suggested donation on there, so if you can give, that is wonderful. As Steve likes to say, the poetry business, it's, the poetry business is the poetry business. So to get us started tonight, I don't want to take any more time away from our lovely poets. We first have Megan Grumbling. Megan is a writer, editor, and teacher who lives in Portland. Megan's second poetry collection, Persephone in the Late Anthropocene, an expansion of her libretto for an experimental opera, was released by Acre Books in fall 2020. It has a beautiful cover, I should say. Her first collection, Booker's Point, an oral history-driven portrait of an old Maine woodsman, was awarded the 2015 Vassar Miller Prize and the 2017 Maine Book Award for Poetry. Awarded the Ruth Lilly Fellowship and the Robert Frost Foundation Award, her poetry appears widely in literary journals. Megan also writes theater criticism, book and film reviews, journalism, and essays. Her work is deeply influenced by stories, documentary modes, and the natural world. So welcome, Megan.
Hello. Thanks so much to the library and to Becca for having us. It's a pleasure to get to read with some of our crew here, and thank you all for being here with us for some poetry tonight. I'm going to read a couple older things and a couple newer things I'm experimenting with. And the first one, I don't know about you, but it's been a really long winter for me and a really long semester for me. And I feel like in another 2 weeks when the semester is over, I am really ready to take a sauna and just like sweat it all out. So I thought I would read this poem I have about purging in a sauna. And it's called Purge. In the Bethel Sauna. Supine and stripped, we're bent in crooked thrall to yellow pine's rash, blaze, and roar. Sludge seeps from us logged beasts, our permeable faults and pores engorged with gunk. And so Nance scrapes with wooden blades, confides how mortified she'd been in Turkish hammams, with her mess of rampant nether hair, bowing to strikes from toothless matrons, dark pendulous breasts to waists, and how she oozed, and how it reeks, how vile, how badly you want to excuse yourself, because it's you fouling the steam, your grime they breathe. Such sublime abuse, the body's humbling, such relief. We well, knowing ourselves porous, absolvable. So that'll be me in like 2 weeks. Just all that gunk will be beating it out of me. Yeah, thank you. We should all do that. I know a really good sauna in Bodenham if anyone would like the number. This is a kind of new poem from last fall, I guess. I don't know if anyone's seen Pamela Moulton or Posey Moulton's sculptures out at Payson Park. Has anyone seen them? These really beautiful, she made them out of old like ropes and fishing netting and created these very like Dr. Seussical kind of tree-like things, and they're big enough that you can kind of stand under them or hug them, or just they're really whimsical and lovely. If anyone knows Pamela, they're very like of her aesthetic. And so she had a reading of poets as part of the celebration for this installation, and I wrote this for the reading and the installation. The name of the installation is Under the Forest, Under the Sea, and so you'll hear that phrase in the poem. And the poem is called Our Intertwining. Under the forest, under the sea, we entangle, we entwine our fronds and feathers, fingers and fins. We spool, wind, interweave in sloughed skin, scales and leaves, in strands of eelgrass, of mycelium, of our own hair, black or brown or silver blonde. Untethered in our underworlds, loosening ourselves in salt and soil, silt and sand, we ticklingly mingle our talons and nerves, tentacles and gills, our trails of microbes. We trade fibers, chemicals, blue-bright chemical thrums. We trade breath. Untangling, we undo each other's bounds and grow our bonds. Entwining, we become less self, less any single spore or eyelash, whisker or stem, and become more we, a flickering whirl of beings dissolving and restoring, cells never same or still, ever a rush of prism and rinse. Sloughing and spooling and tangling and entwining, we are many times alive. In the pink, we say, because all of it was really pink. It was very pink sculpture. In the pink, we say, and what we mean is in the flush, the pulse, the hum, a warm and shimmering synchrony of selves. Under the forest, under the sea, amidst our fronds and feathers, fingers and fins, we braid and bestow, borrow and become each other. I'm going to read a couple sort of prose poem things that are pretty new, and they're all sort of about story and kind of looking at various things in nature and things done with nature and thinking about story and how it affects story. It's a little, I don't know, see how it goes. The first one is called Crow Tree. The tree has swallowed a crow. That svelte, dark burl in a high crook of the pine is clearly crow-like, its cocky assurance evident, even swallowed, slightly pulsing even, a small shake of feathers smoothed and absorbed by bark, cellulose, and cambium. That's where the crow came inside the tree. I don't think to worry for the crow. The crow and its story have already changed, are still changing, becoming more than crow, and are in turn changing the tree, bringing into its cells something gloriously vagrant and arch, a bristling caw, a scavenger's knowing. The crow is changing the story of the tree to one she can live with, one she can live in. She doesn't seem to be a parasite, is not turning the tree into a zombie to her crow story, and the tree doesn't seem to be tamping down the entirety of the crow's crowness. The crow and the tree seem to be figuring it out as symbionts, an exchange, a consensus. Who even knows if it was the tree who swallowed the crow after all, or if it was the crow who slipped inside its crook? Who knows who else the crow might slip inside? Who else might grow darker and bristling with caw? Museum of Boxes. These are all real stories, but this one is from, I was out in LA recently and encountered this crazy artist out in this place out on the edge of the Mojave, and her art is described in this next one. Museum of Boxes. In a low-lit old building, a telephone signal receiver house on the edge of the Mojave, the story is transmission. The story is made up of smaller stories, each in a lit box with a glass front. Inside each is a composition of preserved creatures, leavings and refuse, egrets and owls and bats, rotting telephone books and ragged prayer books. Not exactly a still life, a still myth. The artist of the boxes finds these cast-offs and dead creatures, or really they find her because, she says, they have something to say to her. They have something to transmit, something she discovers and channels into a box, a story. With the subtlest gestures, a warbler's single claw grasping at a collapsing leather building, an owl splaying its wind proprietarily over a glowing orb. Once created, the artist says, the story boxes are transmitting to each other, and of course, to anyone else who enters this museum of boxes. The specific stories in the boxes vary: a heron's betrayal of frogs stranded up a ladder, an owl wistful for a crow's spilled jars of sulfur and cadmium. But the story of this collective room, this museum of boxes, is transmission. Not just that the story is transmitted, as any story is, the story is transmission. Its thrum, its myths like mycelium and static, travel my nerves and into my bones, follow me home. Twig. Walking somewhere, the promenade or the graveyard, I step past a fat twig like a caterpillar, and also a twig fat like a caterpillar, and that also squiggled like a caterpillar, a little wriggled ripple in its otherwise straight, static form. I see it as I step and feel a pang, some kind of gentleness or tenderness, without quite knowing why. A step or two later, the pang sustains like a tone struck on a small bell. I turn back, kneel, and peer. Fat caterpillar twig, wriggle in its middle, down, up, like a W. Each movement in the wriggle, something it once had to grow around, a stimulus or an obstacle, something it lived through. My pang and tenderness surge, harmonize with what I now can name. My sudden understanding that this twig, like me, this tree being, has a story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Next up, we have Craig Sipe. Craig is the author of the poetry collection Lovely Dregs. I love that name. His recent work has appeared in journals, including Iconoclast, Spank the Carp, another great one, Last Leaves, and Hole in the Head Review.
I always like to list the Spank the Carp one because I like to hear people say Spank the Carp. Thanks to the library for having us here. It's a great night for poetry, the end of National Poetry Month. Going to begin with something a little aggressive. This one's called The Poet at the Dive Bar Fight. If I'd been there, I would have pummeled their fists with my jaw, shattered their booted tootsies with my groin, and vomited upon their collective well-beings with maudlin poetry rife with device. They're lucky I wasn't there that night. My ambulance would have flattened their assonances. So how are we enjoying this Maine spring? This next poem is about a typical Maine spring, with apologies to Mr. Keats. Season of silt and sallow muckfulness, face down splat friend of mealy cuckoldness, oh, fickle spring in Maine, merely a fling with its half-rump sun trousers dropped to the mulch. Where are the songs of spring? Please, Keats, whose name spelling should rhyme with Yeats, but though that would make the latter Yeats, but it doesn't matter because the former is Saxon, and we must relax on our poppies about roots. For here we track ill-crossed pollen flowers in mudroom chapels, cucked boots that chill mists piss in, the weather is indifferent, all a conjure on the moors. 6 more weeks of sludge to the fore, the full-grown lamb chops sizzle on the stove, hedge crickets sniffle in treble by their grove. It's another kind of a spring poem and kind of harkens back to COVID days. It's called Daffodowndillies, April 2020. The daffodowndillies are coming up this Easter in Maine. Ordinarily, we would call them daffodils, but we err to the quirk in times like these. But when aren't there times like these, somewhere, when something novel, pernicious, and fervid springs up madly in the world? Yet today, those interlopers invade my roads, my yards and gardens, and I am a racist plate hater of those from poxed places like Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. They drive madly by, exhaling their seeds through open Lexus windows, waving to me as a friend splashing through their lunger puddles while I stand bum-fuzzled, lurching into the widdershins. This is where the daffies spring in, just now poking through April in Maine when winter comes to mud and the dillies portend summer, and the passion to believe in preen preventing the weeds from popping up everywhere, which is poppy cock, you know, dirt being transmogrified into an elevated form of compost, the fine whelp of decay, no matter where you buy it, no matter what your shred or sift, the daffodowndillies will love it all the same, sucking up their rich mud hope every year. This one's called Her Yawn. My wife has the world's best yawn. It consumes her entire face, like a black hole where I can see all the lost stars surrendered to her gravity, winking back at me, and then snap, close, and her face reappears, sated. Exploding spleen martini. Even the small number of words I can still say swizzle up my spleen. And when they are finally annulled, expunged, eviscerated, I will be blessed, left to the bar, pissed and muted over a cool shot of backwash bile, throated up in a silent, serene state of seethe. One more for the goad. This is sort of a sports poem. It's called The Lost Pittsburgh Guy. I'm a Pittsburgh guy. Kevin, you'll find out, is a Pittsburgh guy too. The Lost Pittsburgh Guy. As I look back on my rooting life, the Steelers won 6 Super Bowls, the Penguins 5 Stanley Cups. Even the Pirates copped 3 World Series before etching the abject all-time record of losing into the stone scrolls of major North American sports, all of which may have nothing to do with me, all of which the ticker works and septic clutch of which makes me wish that I never assimilated the snot morality of winning, that I never gave 2 frothing craps about sports, somehow never turning my own corporeal cred upon the hairpin curve of a score. Nevertheless, I am mofo in the logo, beer low, so the cure for cancer will have to wait until these bastards in the slow-mo can punch it in 4th and 1. This is another related sports poem. It's called Fanatic. Fanatic. I had my own street light pole installed in the middle of the backyard. That way, whenever my team wins, the big one, I can rush out the house in a dark and stormy lather and scale up that bad staff, baying mad blather at the moon. And that way, whenever my team loses the big one, I can rush out the house in a dark and stormy lather and scale up that bad staff, baying mad blather at the moon. Sometimes my wife, who is not half so much the rabid fan, likes to slather axle grease on the pole and sit by the kitchen window with a gimlet. Two more. This one's called Manifesto Man. Good dating advice to the daughter I never had might be to ask the prospect if he has ever written or is working on a manifesto. If he says yes, it might be then polite to order the shellfish and swell up in front of him like a tick. And finally, the cozy soup. All this natter about borders, nationality, and race finds me longing for the simpler days of primordial ooze, when we all moleculed about the cozy soup in our unsovereign states of goo, gunk, silt, slop, sludge, alluvium, and muck. When we had a convention back then, we just mired our slimy non-butts over to the consomme and checked in. No need to take off our shoes. And when someone threw up, no one knew who. Thank you. Watch the water.
Wonderful, thank you. I think having just finished a book, Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton, that has a young man with a manifesto in it, I very much appreciate that advice. So wonderful. Our third poet of tonight is Kevin Sweeney. Let me know if this is out of date here. I see your bio says you published 2 books of poems, but with a third one coming out. Did that one come out? Wonderful. Let's see, 2 of those books with Moon Pie Press, which we love here at the library. He received a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in 1975. And since 1983, he's taught English at Southern Maine Community College, where he is a department chair and my favorite as president of my union, shop steward of his union. So wonderful. Good to have a union man here.
I probably could never get a job at Starbucks with my union pass, but I'll keep that quiet. So I want to try to go fast and not introduce poems too much. But the first title of my poem is actually it's my favorite title of my own poetry. It's called Uncle Vanya from Chekhov in Madtown. And Madtown, if you're from southern Maine, never been up to Worcester County, that's Madawaska. So, and it's about, and I'm a lifelong teacher, and we always are second guessing how we did our lesson that day or last week. I could have been better at discussing Chekhov's play, though I told students about a production in Cambridge. Actors on stage 25 minutes before curtain passed out from another Russian drinking night, like those on Old Peaks Island. I might have said Chekhov was writing about Maine, where long winter appropriates April, and people drink too much too early, then wake to hard mornings. The idea, one student said, is get out of Russia. But Vanya was tethered, like Sonia, to the estate, could only long for Yelena, the youthful beauty married to an old academic who owned the place. My class was too young to understand a Russian midlife crisis that made this short, chubby man try to shoot the selfish elder. They thought Vanya should take a yoga class because I failed to tell him about Route 11. Not the road near New Hampshire, where he'd stock up on cheaper vodka, nor the middle near Millinocket, close to summer concerts at Darling's Waterfront Pavilion in Bangor. It's south of Fort Kent, the stretch from Portage to Patton, dubious cell service and tedious trees. It wouldn't be easy to live in Fort Kent, I should have said, though locals from the county might disagree, pointing out contemplative river views, poutine at the Swamp Buck restaurant, a small university campus where if Vanya truly thought he could have been Schopenhauer or Dostoevsky, he'd take classes. No need for Bangor if he experienced ennui, only 20 miles to racy Madawaska, and Parisian-like beauties in bars redolent of joie de vivre rather than the anguish of Russian souls. I see him driving along the St. John's River, listening to radio songs in French, crossing the bridge to Edmundston, heading to Quebec, where women take off their clothes on nights of single-digit cold. Then back to Madtown, where the VFW's onion soup has drawn veterans from far away as Van Buren. But it's too late. Maybe next semester I'll place Vanya in Presque Isle, eating Chinese alone from the food court's only restaurant in a rustic center mall. Maybe I'll talk more about Sonia and gloomy Dr. Astroff. But it's windy, 10 degrees, says Channel 6. We'll be here soon. Snow will be here soon. So I sent some Pennsylvania poems to my fellow Pennsylvania native Craig and asked him to give me some suggestions, and this was the one he liked best. I think it's going to enable me to use the first dirty word tonight, or you came close with mofos. But this is called In Lieu of Flowers, and it's a short one. Stanley J. Turpin died a year ago near Roscoe. No cause provided in the obit by Melanizer Funeral Homes and Cremation Services in Charleroi, where he's listed with people named Popelus, Yewuziak, Dorink, Dubnansky. Bruce and Robbie called him Turp, but I liked Stanley J., the antithesis of Jimmy, the choice his parents made. He'd planned to come to Maine with Bruce and Robbie a few summers ago, then declined, saying he didn't feel welcome. We'd last talked 15 years earlier when he'd called to say, "Merry Christmas, motherfucker." His wife had left. His brother had been murdered in a trailer by the river where he sold drugs. Turp had tried suicide once, but stumbled out of the house before the gas could take him down. He just landed a 6-month job substitute teaching industrial arts at our high school, but said, "I hate them fucking kids." The obit said he'd taken up flying, and that in lieu of flowers for a service that wouldn't be, pick up a 6-pack at Beer Here, which had lost a most valued customer. So Craig also gave me, as I trying to decide what to read, I brought a whole bunch of stuff. Craig read a wife poem, and so just in case he gets in any trouble for it, I'm going to read a wife poem too, even though one of our friends is here, and I could get in trouble as well. But some of these music references, I don't know if you'll get them or not. When I'm, the reason I brought this up is to watch myself. I'm a teacher for many years, and I know if you go too long, everybody's going to get up and go to the bathroom. So this is, it's called, the title is, At Least It's Not the End of the World as We Know It. I'm old, 74, and my wife is young, 61. We've never agreed about music. When we were 40 and 27, we drove home in a snowstorm, and she dominated the radio. I said all her music was thumpa thumpa, woo woo woo. She taught me to hate The Cure, The Smiths, David Bowie, Talking Heads, Queen. Today, I drive an extra block while returning from the farmer's market so I can hear the rest of Martha and the Vandellas singing Quicksand. Then linger in the car when Sam Cooke comes on with Saturday Night and I Ain't Got Nobody, even though he just got paid. In the house, she has Alexa playing unlimited REM while she's losing her religion in the shower, preparing to later be a shiny, happy person. She's given Cowboy Junkies the morning off, though a marriage counselor might see them as a way to keep me from requesting Miles Davis, Laura Nero, Greg Allman, Mary Wells. Maybe Kings of Leon, younger than both of us, might work, but things could be worse. At least we're not mired in dire straits. One poem I brought two copies of it. Now, of course, I can't find it in a hurry because it's at the back. If you go to work and your boss ever annoys you, or somebody at work annoys you, I like to think that this is a poem that could be, helpful to coping with that experience. And the title of it, it's dedicated to our former administrator at my school, is Hi, Folks. At the end of the day, I hope to be transitioning back to the box from which I've been thinking outside of, since ramping up my efforts to develop the kind of game plan that would make me lean and mean going forward, my fellow Americans, just saying no to negativity, that's not being too negative, in order to impact the future with the kind of initiative that promises to be transformational, which will allow me to take things in a new direction as I try to establish my brand in the global economy of the 21st century, in which advanced know-how will continue to be essential and upgrades of technology and workplace skills the ultimate solution. Now, as I begin to morph into someone who is emotionally unavailable, I'd like to apologize to anyone who might have been offended by anything I might have said, if you know what I'm referencing. That was certainly not my intent, and I wished always to be transparent. Okay, folks, I've got to go push that envelope under the bus. Let me maybe do two more. We're going to do a film issue at some point, and I wrote a poem about a film that I saw right, where exactly? The Time and Temperature Building. Anybody remember when the Civic Theater used to be way downstairs in the basement? I used to go down there to take piano lessons, too, from Miss Montpelier. But you could go to movies there back in the day in Portland in the 1950s. So this is about a movie I saw there. And so the title of the poem explains it. The Vikings, starring Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis. I hope somebody's heard of them. One of the best things about the movie was Kirk Douglas being blonde, like me, a fat 10-year-old. So I gained hope one day I, too, could have a chiseled face and muscles with veins and not be afraid of heights. One day, climb walls while people above are throwing spears at me. Kirk was tougher than Tony Curtis, tough as Ernest Borgnine, who jumped into a pit of wolves screaming, "Odin!" a Scandinavian word that meant something other than free health care. Vikings weren't afraid of anything. Later, I heard some got shipwrecked near Ireland and swam to shore, where, after converting to Catholicism and having sex with Irish wives, they fathered blonde, blue-haired babies who looked like me. I'd heard something similar about the Spanish Armada survivors, which is why some Irish babies had dark hair but were still as gloomy as the rest of us. What I remember most is how Kirk didn't kill Tony, pondering a moment the possibility Tony was his half-brother. Tony, afraid and seeing an opening, suddenly killed Kirk, who, the end of the movie suggested, wasn't a bad guy, though no one would use an un-Viking word like sensitive. So maybe the other lesson is that Irish Catholic guilt wasn't born on the Emerald Isle, but came to us via those reasonable and sharing people of the fjords who refused to kill their own kin, believing the song about smiling on your brother still holds true. Thanks. So actually, I'll do two more and call it. Let me just check my time. Yeah, I'm okay, I think. I hope so. This is, again, one more Worcester County poem. If you remember, some of you might have felt a little blue around 2016. Am I okay? Close? Time? Okay. So it's called A Temperature in Worcester County. Melancholy arrives with clouds and news the ocean is 57 degrees at the large navigational buoy this first week of July. But joy follows when NPR notes that the air in Van Buren is 67, while Wells is only 59. Van Buren is sunny, too. Maybe a reward for being progressive, unlike Caribou and Presque Isle. The enlightened electorate of Van Buren emulated neighbors in Madawaska and St. Francis voting for Hillary. An anomaly not only in the county, but around our rural state, where Donald won Fort Kent by 11 votes and Glenwood Plantation 2-0. But light shines in Van Buren, where old Peaks Island friend Peter, back from Vietnam, began his teaching career on the St. Johns River, a school whose children spoke French at recess. Thank you, God and the usually random skies of Maine, for news of brightness and warmth on the eve of my 69th birthday in South Portland, nearing the end of a life lived in improvisation, while others ably followed a crafted script, finishing in paid-off houses with copious garages, extra bedrooms, bountiful children close to home who haven't succumbed to amorphous bad luck. Hearing the forecast on a day going the wrong way brings me back on stage to a story constantly revised by teleological playwrights. I'm driving my 17-year-old car amid the bearable lightness of being, certain the tank is full, weather promising. For once, this poor player neither struts nor frets. Indeed, I know all my lines. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, and to round us out tonight is Steve Luttrell. Steve is an internationally recognized poet and publisher. He's the founding editor of the Café Review, a past poet laureate here in Portland, and is the author of 5 published collections of poetry.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to Becca and the library for having us here. I just wanted to, as we're assembled here, we're only missing our art editor who has 2 small children, so he can't be here. But what a joy it is to be able to, as you can hear, these truly talented people, what a joy it is to work with them. And Katie, our managing editor, because it's you can't do it without it takes a village. This is the village. So yeah. Well, Mother's Day is coming up, so I'll begin with an appropriate poem for Mother's Day. How is it one remembers certain folk, as others lost to faded time fall, lost and quite forgot? What can it matter? I remember you, standing on this doorstep of 1967, the sun on your face, so full of hope for the sun standing before you. Mothers must stay hopeful of their children. Somehow, it just seems natural that they should. And so that's for Mother. This is the holiday that was just in the rearview mirror. Earth Day. Too much life came forth to hold. The world filled up and overflowed. Poor old bloated world. My wife and I were recently, last year, a couple of years ago, I don't know, the COVID thing's kind of throwing things off. We were in Ireland, and the first stop that we made was to the tower house of one of my favorite Irish poets. And so this poem is called Tor Ballali. We came to the tower through a thin gray rain, early on a morning late in May, and a murder of crows raised a terrible screech at our coming. With square-cut blocks of ancient granite made, it keeps its secrets close, this storied tower, while slender windows catch the early sun. In the photograph, I would stand at the bridge that spanned the rushing water. In early May, in the greening time, we came upon the tower, which, of course, is a title of one of the aforementioned poet's own work, The Tower. Daylight savings. It was, as I remember, sometime in mid-November that I turned back the clock. They called it daylight savings. I wanted so much to turn it back to 1965, but an hour was all I was allowed, and an hour hardly matters when one is saving time. See, that's the good thing about writing short poems. You can read like 50 of them in 5 minutes. This is entitled An Ordinary Thing. It was early one morning when I saw him through the window of a small downtown cafe, a tattered city form in rags and desperation, nervous, vexed, and dirty, and in heated conversation with himself. I watched him for the length of time it took to drink my coffee, and one might say it seemed an ordinary thing. And yet the memory lingers still. He was a perfect stranger, and I never even came to know his name. Some of our less fortunate citizens of Portland, of which, unfortunately, there seem to be more than ever. I don't know what that says about the times. The grave digger's hands. One comes to know the texture of the earth, moving and removing it in turns. Hard pack and mud slush, shovelful and bucket, with hands coarse and calloused like the knots and burls of an ancient tree, grown hoary with age and weather, grown strong with unceasing labor. The grave digger's hands hold a memory and a feeling for forgotten things, and the cold gray logic of the stone. The grave digger's hands can offer no redemption, but can still and will fulfill one's final needs. One of the things I'm sure we've all noticed is slogans. Don't you love slogans? Slogans. So the title of this poem is noise. Slogans jam the airwaves. Slogans fill my ears. The message is a narrative of noise. Everywhere, every day, the noise is inescapable, while the poem strives to find its voice in this chaos of confusion, where slogans choke the music of the phrase and leave the mind a mangled mess for measure. My wife is a genealogist, and so it only makes sense that I would write a poem entitled The Family Tree. So, this is the family tree. Every family has one, or maybe two or three, familial relations hanging off their tree. The one that's never spoken of in polite society. An Uncle Bob, a crazy aunt, could never be invited to the annual reunion in the fall. One must keep up appearances in public, after all. I try to stay light. I had a friend once, Pat Murphy, that wrote really funny poetry because he saw the world that way. And I was always very jealous and envious that Pat could write poems that were funny because he saw the world that way. And so I tend to try to look for something because most of mine, as my wife pointed out this morning, tend to be dark. This is called 13 Hercules. And for all of you Blake fans in the audience, you recognize the address. And when I was in London, I went to 13 Hercules, but it doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of like 221B Baker Street. It's an insurance. It just doesn't exist. But anyway, 13 Hercules, Mr. Blake's house. It was always there, a range of possibilities one could reach out, take hold of, make sense, somehow make use of. It was always there, needing only to be noticed in the dance of light just beyond the margins. And again, relating to our trip to Ireland, and this poem is for Krista, and it's entitled The Famine House. One sees them now and then while driving through the country, a house reclaimed by nature, roof gone, windows gone. A wild ivy climbs the chimney up, embraced with vines and thick with gorse, but with a door of strong, strong oak, still fastened to its frame on rusted hinges. It seems a ghostly welcome in its way, but those that lived there left there, so I won't stop to visit there today. Thank you. A few more. Emblems of imagination. The moon is not an ornament, the sun is not a god, and all the stars aren't found in Hollywood. The sky, oh, the sky must be containment in itself, limitless, knowing no circumference, and yet these things so celestial in their fixture become emblems to the mind unfettered. How curious imagination be, taking what it will to fit its purpose. And like Mr. Sweeney, growing up on Peaks Island, I didn't grow up, but I got older in South Portland at a place called Willard Beach. Still waiting to grow up. Can't avoid getting older. So this is called, for all my buddies, the class of 65, this is The Point at Willard Beach. On rocky ledge and high above, a beach of sea-smooth stones and seaweed-scented air where once young boys in cut-off jeans would dare each other dive. I'm looking out beyond the bounds of eyefall, where a watery geography holds sway, a wide, wet world in motion and in time, that only tides can tell, and wind and wave can measure, while underfoot, in creviced ledge, tide pools keep a smaller world, confined to rock and seaweed, where microscopic life forms move in a salty ocean brine that shimmers in the sunlight of a summer long ago. And this is a couple more. This is a modern-themed poem. I think this came to me at lunch at Becky's. This is called a lunch encounter. They've just met, this couple at the lunch counter. They met online and found the time for lunch and conversation, which breaks in waves of a nervous rant that's never not unsure and falters on its own revealed pretensions, heavy with its purpose and trying to avoid the old faux pas. Will they, won't they, meet again? Impossible to know, as I have come to witness and to go. Okay, a couple more. Check this. Hopefully you're all having a good time. I have to compliment Becca for being our host, and also for being a very optimistic woman, because I'm looking at all these seats and thinking that she's a very optimistic lady. Okay. So, another poem about Portland. Coming to the Fore, F-O-R-E. How often I have looked to see this river in its moving toward this harbor. From a hillside down, across this river's mouth, one can see the scope of it, how it opens out and curves around behind the small squat lighthouse to a low rocky shore where warships once were built. Now oil tanks stand out against the shoreline in shades of faded green. How often have I looked to see and saw that granite fort placed solid in the harbor, a jewel amongst the islands of the Sound. That fort in the Civil War did not fulfill its purpose and sits now like a bookmark to some unfinished story. How often have I come to see this harbor and its moods, and the great Atlantic Ocean coming to the fore. Okay, two more, and that should bring me right up to the requisite time. Spirit Song. This is, well, I have to say, not having met her, but I'm a big fan of her work. So this is a poem that isn't so much dedicated, but in the spirit of a poet by the name of Joy Harjo. This is called Spirit Song. The wind blew it in his face. He couldn't feel it. The ocean broke it at his feet. He couldn't hear it. The mountains pointed the way. He never noticed. The sun would light it up. He couldn't see it. Everywhere and always, still, he never knew it. That meaning he would crave and never find. Okay, I'll end with this one. And again, I'd like to thank Becca and the folks at the library for having us. This is the first time in a long time they've had a reading here, and it's also the first time in a long time that the entire staff, well, I can't say the entire, the poets of the Café Review, because Katie and Danny do our graphics, and so anyway, this is it. So this is a joy for me to be able to read with you guys. This is called Relics. I identify with this, right? Yeah. Old houses, new owners, and stories of the generations palpable in empty rooms, and clocks set to times that will not come again. A lifetime of accumulation left for others' care, or the chore of its eventual disposal. Dust and rust seem only a patina in this place, and relics of a different time, unclaimed in disarray, crowd and clog, creaking stairways in the hall, and nothing lost that wasn't found by the new owners of an old house. Thank you very much for coming.